and warm. We've been absent for the last few weeks. We were on a trip to Wisconsin for work, and we just praise the Most High we're back. Thank you so much for all of your prayers for my ribs. They're feeling much better these days, although I'm still taking a little bit of pain medication to try to help me get through the day. But besides that, it's such a huge difference from over a month ago when I was in a ton of pain where I could barely sit up. So thank you guys all for joining us today. We just had a really great reading with Digital Readers Club on Zen Garcia's channel. You're welcome to join us there every Saturday. An hour before this, we get together and we read the extra biblicals together, and we discuss them afterwards with Zen, who is such a great teacher, and I've learned so much from him and from a lot of other people over the years, but especially from Zen, because he's always encouraged reading extra biblicals, and that was something that I was not raised doing, so it was a little bit taboo for me for a while at the beginning. But now that I've done a lot of research and I've actually read tons of them for myself, it's gotten a lot easier to make the links and to actually understand the Bible. It's so important. But we just welcome all of you guys here today. Noble is not with us today, unfortunately, although he is in the chat. Hi, Noble. If you're watching, you can say hi to him in the chat. He is Hanky George in the chat, and he is continuing to work today while Isaac, Kaylee, and I are running the Hebrew class today. But we do have a wonderful, awesome special guest that I haven't talked to for a while. It's been, I think, since last year, the last time I actually talked to him during one of our shows, and that was like a marathon show. You remember that, Nathan? It was like a 4.5 hour, maybe almost 5 hour show that we did, because we just were so excited that we had so much in common, and we've been studying very similar things. And then he's since done a show or two, I think, with Isaac, and a show or two with Noble. But now I get to discuss with Nathan all of the questions that I wanted to talk to him about and all of the things that I've been researching. So hang on to your hats, everyone. This is going to be an amazing show. I'm so excited, Nathan. We have Nathan here online, but we're going to start out doing some prayer requests. I know that we missed doing prayer requests last week, but there's several very pressing prayer requests that I'm not sure if everyone is aware of. Our friendly moderator from chat, and I believe she's also a moderator for Nathan's channel as well, for, Tammy George. She's such a faithful moderator in chat, and she's always been there for the past 3 years that we've been doing our show. Just a couple months ago, she got very sick and she was hospitalized. However, now she is out of the hospital and she is home recovering, but continued prayers for her. She has no one to care for her right now, and she's trusting in the Most High to be that Heavenly Father for her that He always has been, and to just give her peace and to continue healing of her lungs. She had a blood clot in one of her lungs, and she has since improved her health, which is a really good sign. I spoke with her today, so she wanted to let everyone know that she loves all of you guys, and she thanks so much for all of the prayers for her. She was in a very kind of precarious situation, being in the ICU for over a month, I believe, but praise God, they released her, and she is now continuing to gain recovery at home. I was so happy to actually be able to talk to her today. It's just been text before this because her lungs were so weak, and I kind of know how that feels with my ribs being broken. It's really hard to breathe, and it's hard to think about anything besides my ribs for the past, what has it been, 6 weeks now. But recovery has been great. I had an x-ray from my chiropractor a couple days ago, and it shows one of the 2 ribs that was broken is now fused together, so that's a good sign. The other one is still on the way to recovery, so it still feels a little strange when I take a deep breath. But the guys put me to work when we were in Wisconsin. I was doing some painting.
Put you to work? Oh my God.
No, I actually put myself to work, because I know it's like kind of pressure to see like them doing all of this work in the house that we're staying at, and then I'm just sitting there doing nothing. So I said, okay, I need to just do something at least. And it's also good. It was good to help my breathing, and I just did some I guess you could say light painting, although I did paint every room in that house. It was a good workout. It was really good. I think it was good to increase my muscles and to just keep my I don't know what you call it, my health better. It helped get more oxygen to my lungs. But back here in Hawaii, I can definitely feel the oxygen going in my lungs a lot better than in Wisconsin with the freezing cold air there. But anyway, enough about that. Let's go into any other prayer requests. Kaylee, would you like to join us here? Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Let's have Isaac open us up in prayer first, and then we'll go into the prayer request. Come here, Isaac. Could see his handsome face here.
Yeah, I don't know who you're talking about.
Didn't
That's
they-
not me.
Didn't they do a good job last week? I know for all of you that were watching their show last week, Isaac and Kaylee taught.
Shalom.
Isaac did a wonderful job teaching. Okay, so Isaac's going to open us up in prayer.
Okay. Thank you, Father, so much for another amazing day, another amazing time where we get to learn more about you, who you are, and what you have planned for us. May we continue to walk in your path of righteousness, and may you keep our way straight as you have always planned to do. Whatever it is that you wish for us to learn today, I ask that we would absorb it and take it in with humble hearts so that it can transform us into deeper followers of you, so that we too can worship you in spirit and in truth as you have sought us out for it. Thank you for all these things, and we ask all of this in Yeshua's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Isaac. Okay, it's going back behind the screen again. All right, now his beautiful wife, Kaylee, come and join us for prayer requests that were submitted. These are prayer requests that are within the last several weeks, so if you have any updates or any new prayer requests, please put them in the chat. Kaylee's going to be watching the chat for your prayer requests so she can take them down. And if there's any updates or changes, please let us know. Okay, go ahead, Sweet.
So, continue prayers for Donna Smith's daughter and grandchild.
Yes,
Um,
they were in an accident.
Yeah, they got into a major accident recently. I think it was it last week? Yeah.
Yeah, I think
so
it
they're
was about a
still
week ago.
trying to recover for that. Prayers for Dayton Rogers, who is seeking spiritual clarity and good health. Prayers for Grace and Kay's reunification. Prayers for Tina's eyesight to be restored. And last but not least, prayers for Christy Frost's blind boxer who is doing unwell. I read that from the chat, so if you guys have any other prayer requests or praise reports, please type them down below in all caps and I'll try to catch them before the end of the live stream. Okay, thank you.
Good job, Kaylee. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, also, we just had a announcement of a death in the family today. It was Isaac's cousin. We just found out about an hour ago via social media from Isaac's auntie we haven't talked to for a while. They're not sure what the cause of death of his cousin is yet, but he was 27 years old and he was found, he had passed away during his sleep. They're not sure exactly what the cause is or anything, but you can keep that family in prayer. And that's also, Isaac thought he'd take a little break, that it was just a lot for him to handle right before our show. He was looking forward to having a good chat with us, but I think it's kind of good to just spend this time in prayer and just to process all of that. He was very close to this boy, and he was kind of like a little brother to him. And I just remember this little guy as a child. He was just super hyperactive, and adults had issues being around him, and the only one that could control him was Isaac, who was only about 3 years older than him. And that was partially because this little guy really loved Isaac. He thought Isaac was awesome. This one, you're maybe about 10 years old, maybe 9, 10 years old. And also Isaac would threaten him. He didn't want to get beat up by Isaac, so he had a lot of respect for him. But anyway, he was a sweet kid. He just had a lot of issues, and very wealthy parents who sent him to boarding school instead of dealing with the issues. So a lot of prayer for their family and for Isaac as he's coping with this news. But anyway, we want to welcome Nathan. Nathan, can you please speak so we can hear you, brother?
Absolutely. Really excited to be here, Lisa.
So glad. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come on our show. I noticed you just had a premiere like about an hour ago or something on your channel. You've been a busy guy. I mean, Isaac and Kaylee and I and Noble, we've been watching your shows like sporadically whenever we have a chance to, but you are on it, brother. Oh my goodness. What I noticed that premiere, you were talking about seeds and planting, and where you're at it's springtime, or it's almost springtime, right?
It's getting there. It's getting there. We're finally getting the other seasons. You guys have that equatorial, like wonderful, continuous season, but for those of us, man, we're looking at the frost date and we're trying to get some stuff prepared. It's a really exciting time.
Yeah, when we were in Wisconsin, they were saying that it's like unnaturally warm in like the Midwest this time of year. Is it like that for where
It's
you're
been
at too?
It has been an absolutely strange winter. It's felt like spring for almost a month now. So it's going to be devastating if a cold comes through in a lot of ways. I'll tell you that much. But hey, that's what you can expect, the unexpected. So it's a good time to be alive and a bad time to be an early sprouting fruit tree.
That's true. That's true. I wanted to show you too first. I was so excited to show you this because the last time when we talked with you, I think it was maybe September. I want to think August maybe. And you recommended this book, and I immediately ordered it because I was so excited to read all of the things that you were talking about in it. And it is definitely an amazing one. I love reading about the lost tribes, and as you said before, you've also dove into the God culture and how the Philippines is a lost tribe location and also known as Ophir in the Bible. And I was so excited to show you this one. But I wanted to talk to you too about any books that you were reading recently, and if you'd like to share information on those.
Oh, well, that's super. That's a great book. For those of you that have not heard or aren't familiar with the book she's talking about there, The Discovery in Ancient America, that book is one of those transformational paradigm shifters because it's chronicling just not just the discovery and evaluation of the oldest copy of stone of the Ten Commandments written in Paleo Hebrew. That's what she's showing up there right now. And that is in a place outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico, in the middle of stinking nowhere desert land, next to a trash dump, of course, naturally. But there's Yahuwah Elohim that is written also at the top of the mountain, and there's been a very strategic, deliberate, just abandonment of that site. And so it's actually, unfortunately, a lot of it's been defaced or kind of treated terribly because people don't want anybody to examine the historicity of Hebrews being over here in the Americas, because boy, is that a paradigm shifter towards the historical narrative. And look at those wonderful fragmentary scrolls of goodness right there. Hey, just for reference, this is one I went to a library, and man, did I find some cool stuff there. And this is the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible, and this was one of the first ones that put out, just taking the fragmentary scrolls that they had available and trying to bind together like an actual Bible kind of from that. And this has been one that I have been kind of going through, gleaning from different pearls. I had a different Dead Sea Scrolls translation that I've been looking at throughout the years, but this one really goes through kind of every time there's a difference. Anytime they're like, hey, this part of the story was left out of all of our, whether it was the Masoretic text or even the Greek Septuagint, there's kind of disparity at times between them. And some of these stories, one of which was in Samuel, that I was just beyond excited to find out, which the king Nahash of the Ammonites, when he attacks all of the Reubenites and the Gadites on outside of the land, and he gouges out all the men's right eye. And it's just like this crazy little annotated story in 2 Samuel where you're like, why is it this guy's attacking these men at Jabesh Gilead? But then there's this whole paragraph that was preceding it in the Dead Sea Scrolls that gives you this context to understand he had been attacking the Israelites, and I mean eradicating every man, it said, in the tribes of Reuben and Gad had the right eye gouged out, and 7,000 men fled outside of the city and into this stronghold, and that's from that place that they were crying out and asking Saul. This is during Saul's kingdom. They were asking him to come and help fight for them, and this is the first real war or battle that King Saul has over the people, and it's really what united the nation to have King Saul be their king. And this is a pivotal moment in the story, and this is another, I believe, another impetus of the serpent really coming in. I mean, the guy's name is literally the serpent. The king serpent over all the land comes in to gouge out the eyes of the righteous. And I just see so many parallels to the way that the enemy goes in to blind people and to lead them astray, strategically, and then to sow fear into the hearts of all the nation of Israel and to try to lead them into this dread and this terror. But that's been one of those books that I have just been really gleaning from lately, because to me the word, like you were talking on earlier, there's this taboo in a lot of our lives about reading the apocrypha or the pseudepigrapha, or whatever you want to call it, what are the modern man-made versions of these names that they came up with for scriptures that people had used in the past and called scriptures. Even if you don't want to call them scriptures today, I understand some of them are clearly out there in different arenas for that. But to me, it's been a mining arena that I have discovered so much valuable treasure by evaluating it. There's lots of other types of books, that I read that are not related to the scriptures in the same sense. Like I have a passion for permaculture and for farming and gardening, but I also I've been doing a big study on the invisible rainbow. I don't know if you've ever seen this one.
I'm supposed
Come
to order
on.
that for Noble.
Yeah,
Noble's
you
like,
are.
"That's on
You're
my
supposed to
list."
order this one, y'all.
Can
I have
I
an
see how
episode
thick
called
that
The
is?
Invisible Rainbow, Electric Dragons on my
That is
channel,
a
where we go
thick
into just
book.
kind of. What's that?
That's a lot thicker than I thought it was. Can I see the side of
Oh,
that,
yeah.
please? Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm imagining.
Don't be scared. There's lots of references.
I'm imagining a book that's like this. Oh my gosh. Okay, I have to order that for him. It's been on my list for like months to order that book. So please go
It's
ahead.
fascinating study of electricity and its impact on not only humans, on mankind, but also its impact on plants and animals and soil biology, and how much so many of these diseases that began to propagate. Every time there was this kind of bringing out of electromagnetic fields into a wavelength or in a band, like whether it was ultra high frequency or radio waves, there's these outbursts of diseases that manifested in the body, and how those began to transform so many of our lives, whether it was heart attacks, heart disease, whether it was cancer, or a lot of the influenzas. And this is one of the best books that I have gone, and readability wise, not to say that there's others that are out there, but this was one of my absolute favorite ones in evaluating and understanding what is actually happening when our bodies are stuck in the presence of an electromagnetic field. But I've read this one 4 times. Like, this is for me one of my absolute favorite books on studying how the body works, and then how are we being hit with some of these weaponized technologies, and why have any of the mediums that the immortals could have chosen to kind of bring back, in my opinion, the Watchers coming back and enacting a lot of their revenge plot against mankind, which is what I believe we're experiencing. Like when you read in First Enoch and these timelines of these Watchers get released from their prison cells, and they're going to come out with an agenda. They come out swinging. And so I'm always trying to evaluate what are their arenas. And so when I find out they had different principalities of governance that they were in charge of, that they specifically taught people, well, then I'm looking for that as my terrain markers for where these governances of immortals are working their agendas on. And so this is kind of a way that we can contend with those strategies and try to protect ourselves from their deceptiveness, because this subtle craftiness is the name of the game with the dragons.
Oh, for sure. And this has been going, we can always look back as to what things were like before the flood to know what like you said, the doctrines of the Watchers, to know what they have up their sleeves for what's going on in the end times. And we can see a lot, like, the prince of the powers of the air. You just look up in the clouds. The clouds do not look normal. When we were flying back from Wisconsin, we could actually look down on the chemtrail spraying going on. It was just like, it was crazy. You just see, it's strange to see it from that perspective, because you can look down and see all these stripes, whereas we're used to looking up and seeing all the stripes, and then like the weird looking clouds. And I don't know if you've seen anything online, but lately it seems like there's been quite a strange manifestations going on with the clouds. And I know like that whole ancient aliens thing they're trying to push that narrative, but I believe it's the prince of the powers of the air. They're doing very similar things over Earth to just bombard us with all of these horrible chemicals and frequencies and all of their other junk that is just devastating to our bodies.
You are absolutely spot on. And I think you're hitting on something too with the desire to geoengineer the landscape. This seems to be one of those fundamental properties, like it says, really, that the whole earth became altered before the flood. When you want to examine, this is one of my go-to defaults here, the Genesis and the come on now. This was like one of Rob Skiba's most valuable things that he ever put out there. I have gone through, half a dozen copies of this over the years. And this was always like one of those red pill group things that you could kind of introduce people to.
Yes.
You're like, let's ease our way into an examination of history from a lens that most people didn't get growing up. And I love this one for that. This is the
too.
Genesis and the synchronized, biblically endorsed extra biblical text, which was put out by Rob Skiba. So this includes Genesis, First Enoch, and Jasher and Jubilees, but it also has the Septuagint version of Genesis. And the Septuagint version is a plethora of gold when you're trying to examine, hey, what was more of a perspective that people had back then? Because they had older Hebrew manuscripts that they used to bring that translation forth. And so because of that, there were some pearls in there. But part of that agenda of these immortals that came down to alter themselves and change their agenda. Like if you go to Enoch 69 in here, it gives a breakdown of a lot of the where each of these specific immortals was working, what was their kind of area of expertise. And there's some that were way more interested in shape-shifting and changing things, altering things, like Azazel in particular, right? But there's this other one I was reading about here. Let me go, if you guys have it here.
Yes.
It goes through a big late.
I love that
she
you
does.
brought
She's
that
got
book.
First Enoch.
No, I love that you
She's
brought
ready
that
to
book
rock.
up. So, have you seen this First Enoch?
No.
This is put out. This is I love that one. Believe me, that was when I heard you say that was like your first extra biblical that you like dared to open. You know, outside of the 66. That was mine as well, and I ordered that from Rob Skiba. I think back in 2015 or maybe 2016. And since then, I think I've ordered maybe 50 copies of that because we now use that in our in-person Bible study. So everybody has a copy. I love it that it's huge print. Maybe you could show, I don't have it with me, but you could show how the nice large print so you don't have to use a magnifying glass to read it. You know, for your older people in your class, they don't have to like struggle and strain. And I love it that the Septuagint is side by side next to Genesis in there. So like you said, you can easily refer back and forth between the King James and Genesis, which people are familiar with. You want to like have something that people are familiar with to line up. And I love it that he includes Jasher, Jubilees, and First Enoch in there because those are kind of like, I guess you could say gateway extra biblicals to make people a little bit more comfortable because the Book of Enoch is quoted numerous times all in the Bible, so it sounds pretty familiar when you read it. And then Joshua and Jubilees, it aligns directly with Genesis, Exodus, I think the Torah, I believe, both of those books. But this one, this is my new favorite book of First Enoch, just because it's put out by the God Culture. And it's a little bit pricey just because it's full color, but it is well worth it. And Tim Schwab, who is like the ringleader of the God Culture in the Philippines, it's full color. So there are maps of all the gates. There are maps of what Enoch saw. There's it's like very, very well done. And I really like their books, especially at the beginning, because you were talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls there at the beginning. They give a whole rundown of how the Levitical priesthood was usurped by the Pharisees after the captivity in Babylon. And so that brings us to, when the serpent seed was brought into the Levitical priesthood like full force after the captivity, and where the Dead Sea Scrolls actually were. We've actually been to Qumran in Israel where they're located. And we did a little tour of that. This is back in 2014 before we were aware of all these other things. But I really like it. I mean, it gives these charts about the fruits of the Pharisees versus the fruit of the Levites, and how the time right before Yeshua, even when John the Baptist, this is why John the Baptist had to go to the wilderness, because the Pharisees and Sadducees, they were cutting throats of Levites like left and right in those days. And we can read in the Apocrypha, the New Testament Apocrypha, the life of John the Baptist with more detail about that. That's an amazing extra biblical. I don't know if you've read that one yet, Nathan, but that one gives a lot more information about how Zechariah was listed in the New Testament as being killed. I think it's Paul that writes about how they killed the prophets from Abel to Zechariah. And I was wondering, which Zechariah is that? Is that the one talked about, the priest in the Old Testament? That was actually John the Baptist's father. And there's detail about when John was 3 years old and they had the whole... where they were killing all the babies at the time of Messiah in Bethlehem, where they had that slaughter of all the innocents in Bethlehem, and John the Baptist was wanted as well. And so they came to the temple, but they came right after John and his mother had come, and John was actually anointed priest when he was 3 years old by his father, and the angel Gabriel gave him the mantle of Elisha at that point. So that's why he had the spirit of Elijah, but then he was also given his garment, which ties into what we talked about last time with the garments of power, the rod of wonder, that whole narrative that I gave you guys last time with that book that Zen put out about the vestures of light, rod of wonder. And I just think it's so cool how all that's tied together. But anyway, so that is my 2 cents about this book. You can buy this on Amazon. It's $65, but I love it just because of all of the graphics. There's notes on the side that align with other scriptures, and especially the ones that directly quote. Oh, I especially like this chart in the front here too. Tim Schwab put this chart in the front that shows all the times that the book of First Enoch is quoted in the book of Revelation. And so, and also all the times that he's quoted by Paul. I mean, it's kind of cool to have these charts so that when people ask you, well, is this book really authentic, or all the times that it's quoted in the Gospels. I mean, it's very, super valuable, because I was making these lists for myself. For when I was sharing this book with other people, I wanted to have these lists to show them, like, yes, this is a legitimate book. Like, this was not written by a Satanist somewhere. This was written from before the flood. This is the authentic translation book of First Enoch in English for us. So that's my spiel on that. Nathan.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And it takes, well, and you hit upon it really well, because when you try to bring these up to people that have grown up in kind of normative Christianity, it's so taboo. They've been very heavily indoctrinated away from examining for themselves any of these texts. And it's really hard to break through that initial resistance versus just trying to explain to them, listen, you guys read books outside of the Bible continually. Your pastors will preach from stuff that's not in the Bible all the time, and it's not considered heretical. However, like if you're well grounded in the scriptures as a baseline already before you start to examine any of these other texts, you're going to be able to identify stuff that's wonky. Like you hit Second Enoch, you're in the weeds of Luciferianism. And like, it's not like, it's immediately easy and identifiable. You're like, this book is written by somebody that's evil. And you can see that they're dealing with shape-shifting angels and apotheosis quests and all this other stuff. And you're like, I'm reading the book of Freemasons for certain. But
and then you get to the book of Third Enoch and you're like, who's Metatron?
You bet. You're into some crazy stuff. And the problem is most people are not able to just be critically thinking enough for themselves to examine, hey, there's different books that have been put out that have a similar name. You see that this line of names starting out right away from the line of Cain that are very similar to the names of the sons of Seth. And so there's this kind of breakdown between the two, and they get confused by design because the mystery religions came out with their own priesthood, and they began to write their own texts on how to be able to interact and engage, dial the phone book to these immortals and to these mighty ones, and to be able to carry on these traditions. And then you see this just magnification of some of those texts to be exalted. And in my opinion, what you find very clearly is a deep, deliberate agenda to eradicate these other books, these other texts that had been utilized by whether it's first century, whether it's First Temple believers, Second Temple believers. There's times where these texts were clearly being read and examined by authors of the scriptures on a regular basis. They were fluent with it, they were comfortable with it, and they would quote it. Like you held up that text where you can see, hey, here's the times where it's being quoted by them. That's a very valuable tool to understand. This is the stuff that influenced these writers. To them, this was their perspective when it came to supernaturalism. They understood this is why the world was the way it was. And so if you remove the supernaturalism from the scriptures, which people very strategically have done for the last 200 years, and began to augment and alter our scriptures so that the 66 books that we have been denuded to such an extent that they've done away with a lot of the supernaturalism. So when you read like First Enoch, you get very explicit descriptions of the supernatural realm. Like even other books, whether it's the book of Tobit, you get descriptions of specific demons that are being sent on assignment against an individual to keep them from having a husband or having children. Yes. You see specific spiritual warfare methods of getting freedom from that. Or like you see very drastic explanation of what is taking place behind the scenes. And you have that scattered throughout the scriptures, but you have to be able to learn how to find it. Whereas in these books, it's just very easy to read. And I think that's why there has been such a deliberate agenda to keep the enemy of our enemy, right? To keep them ignorant. People want The enemy wants people to stay ignorant. It literally says this in Corinthians. That's his camouflage, right? He doesn't want us to be ignorant of the schemes of the devil, because as long as we're ignorant of the tactics of the enemy, he can hide and he
Yes.
can maneuver and he can keep himself from being spotted. That's a camouflage predator, and that's what a certain it's the primary tactics of serpents. And
Oh,
that's
yeah.
why when you read these things for yourself and you're like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. There's so many people that are lacking understanding because they don't know why the enemy how the enemy works. But like in chapter 69, it literally says, and these are, verse 3, and these are the chiefs of their angels and their names, and their chief ones over hundreds and over fifties and over tens. The name of the first, Jacon, that is, the one who led astray all the sons of Elohim and brought them down to the earth and led them astray through the daughters of men. The second was named Asbiel. He imparted to the holy sons of Elohim evil counsel and led them astray so that they defiled their bodies with the daughters of men. And the third was named Gadriel. He it is who showed the children of men all the blows of death. He led astray Eve and showed the weapons of death to the sons of men, the shield and the coat of mail and the sword for battle, and all the weapons of death to the children of men. And from his hand they have proceeded against those who dwell on the earth from that day forth and forevermore. And the fourth was named Penenemu. He taught the children of men the bitter and the sweet, and he taught them all the secrets of their wisdom. And he instructed mankind in writing with ink and paper, and thereby sinned. Many sinned from eternity to eternity until this day. For men were not created for such a purpose, to give confirmation to their good faith with pen and ink. For men were created exactly like the angels to the intent that they should continue pure and righteous, and death, which destroys everything, could not have taken hold of them. But through this, their knowledge, they are perishing, and through this power, it is consuming me. And the fifth was named Casdeja. This is he who showed the children of men all the wicked smitings of spirits and demons, and the smitings of the embryo in the womb, that it may pass away, and the smitings of the soul, the bites of the serpent, and the smitings which befall through noontide, the heat, the son of the serpent named Taba'it. So you get this breakdown of descriptions on what they were teaching people. And you want to understand the root causes of abortion and the agenda to kill infants in the womb. You have at its root Casdeja. Like, this is the immortal who literally is the power behind the scenes that fuels the iniquity force of the kingdom of darkness, like recharges the battery bank for the kingdom of darkness. This is the way that he would fuel it up. This is the way he'd empower it. And from there, we also have this son of the serpent named Tabayit. There's these methods and tactics of deep darkness, of occultism and witchcraft that are being interchanged in here. And this is the stuff, the mystery religions. This is the knowledge. Like you said, men are perishing through this knowledge. This is the knowledge they're talking about. And this is why the godhood, that promise from the serpent, or what's described here as Gadriel, in the garden, that people would be as gods. That transformation, this is really the evolutionist ideology, the doctrine of it's called becoming in Freemasonry, that was brought to life through Erasmus Darwin, Darwin's grandfather, and then was brought forward even more so mainstream through Charles Darwin's work. This doctrine that you can come from this kind of deep base state and be evolved to godhood, that comes from this promises of knowledge to be the source that unlocks the keys to godhood. And so this is the stuff that we're literally contending with and wrestling with on a regular basis. But you can see how if you selectively remove this part of the story, if you take out these passages that are similar to descriptions of what you find in Jubilees or in Jasher, you suddenly have people that are blind to this, and they have no idea where it's coming from.
Right. And I like how you focused on Gadriel, because that is a huge name in Freemasonry from what I've studied, and also that's the origin of the English word God, because Gadriel, G-A-D, is spelled or is pronounced the way our G-O-D is pronounced. I know there's some discrepancy on this teaching, but from my studies, that's why we have on our dollar bills, "In God we trust." It's not the Most High, it's Gadriel. And also, too, this is another link where it says he led astray Eve. So Gadriel was in the garden. Like, Gadriel is just another name for that entity he's referred to several other times in the Old Testament as the angel of death. I believe this is the same angel that is commissioned by the Most High, known as Samael, I think in Jewish literature as well. The angel of death, the one that is used by the Most High as a fallen angel, but to inflict death, like in Egypt, when the killing of the firstborn, it says the angel of death, flew over, over the homes and smote the firstborn of those who didn't have the blood on the doorposts and all that. And it's really sad because up until I read the book of First Enoch and realized all these roles of the different fallen angels that we don't get much of in the 66, I've been in churches where pastors have taught that angel of death is actually Yeshua. And that is such a huge blasphemy. Now that I know, it just, it would have been the Messiah because he was executing the judgment on the people like he'll do. This is their thinking, not for me. This is the pastors that I've heard, because he'll be the judgment on the judgment seat in the last days on judgment day. And so it's his role to execute judgment on these babies. And I'm like, what? That does not, that is like totally opposite. And so I'm looking here on the notes in this book. I see a lot of people in the chat saying, we need to get this book. And yes, this one is, I think it's $65 plus tax is like $67 on Amazon. You can also get the non-colored book for like $20, but in my opinion, it's well worth to get the colored one. But also too, the angel of death, and also once you realize that Cain was not the son of Adam, and I know this is another kind of iffy topic among certain people, but I think everyone that's in our chat is pretty much in agreement that yes, Cain was not the son of Adam, not listed in the genealogy, and a lot of people have issues with they're in total agreement that the Watchers came in the days of Jared and procreated with human women, which in my opinion were the daughters of Cain, not the daughters of Seth, initially anyway. But they'll be totally on board with all of that, because in Genesis 6, it makes allusion to that, and you read the book of First Enoch, there's more information. But to take it back to the garden when the judgment was actually given, that there had to be something happening there, that more than what we're told in the book of Genesis, just kind of alluded to with the name of Cain, even meaning acquired possession as a stepchild. Why would Adam name his firstborn son acquired possession as a stepchild if it wasn't his, if that was actually his son? And then to name Abel or Seth is like, Abel is like my vanity or someone that looks like me, basically. Because I can imagine Cain did not look like Adam whatsoever. What are your thoughts on that, Nathan?
Oh man, that's quite a subject. I know that there's a big debate amongst others for that, and I'm not persuaded that Cain is from the seed of the serpent in that sense. I haven't been, more so because of Genesis 4:1, and it says when Eve describes that I've received a child from Yahuwah. I know that there's other texts that give a much more direct allusion to that not being the case, but I have not yet been fully persuaded away from that position. I'm 100%. I'm 100% convinced that yes, the injection of the serpent seed line is an absolute reality, but I've been more convinced that and find more evidence that it taking place for certain at the moment of Mount Hermon when they took daughters of men and they began that seed war in a different way. That there was genetic alteration in the injection of the seed line to try to obliterate the righteous seed line in that fashion. So that's kind of where I'm at today.
Yeah,
but I've considered lots of other perspectives on that over the years.
And that's totally understandable. Believe me, it took Noble and me like 4 or 5 years to get to the point of acceptance of that, and that was only like through intense study and tutorials by Zen, basically, and other speakers that we've listened to, and just kind of putting the pieces together and knowing the meanings of the names. A lot of it takes a while, because when you first hear that, you're like, no, it says specifically in the Bible that Eve gave birth, knew her husband and gave birth to Cain, basically, But there's other things that it can be backed up with, but it takes some time, and I think that's kind of similar to other topics that are not necessarily salvation issues, and we don't have to agree on everything. That's just like my perspective that I've come to from my research, but it definitely happened on Mount Hermon, which we've also been up, by the way. When we went to Israel, we took a ski lift up to the top of Mount Hermon, and it was very creepy up there, to say the least. We were met by about 10 UN soldiers off the ski lift, and we were there in the middle of summer, and it was freezing cold, to me anyway. Just a huge amount of cloud coverage where you cannot even see the top of the mountain. And then the mist gets so thick up there, when we were up there anyway, I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. It was just, then you kind of just see like these movement of these soldiers like throughout, like heavily guarded, all with machine guns. I think it's the largest UN base in the world, is conveniently located up there right now. And that's why all of the security, but it's definitely a good experience. It was kind of hard to see anything else except for the clouds that were all encircling that mountain. We couldn't really see too far except for on the way back down the ski lift. But at that point, this is 2014, before I was even aware of Genesis 6 and all the implications and the extra biblicals. I was just like, oh, it's Mount Hermon, it's mentioned in the Bible, yay. You know, I didn't realize why everything felt a little bit evil up there, to say the least.
And this is and I really believe it's the center point for so much of the, showdown of why the Messiah takes his three up there onto the top of that mountain.
Yes.
This is a place of incredible cosmic battles that take place when his ministry was going on, you know, whether he's down at the bottom of it, where you've got these gates to Hades, these gates to the underworld,
right,
where all these other immortals had been worshipped for a long time. And this is where he's literally asking people, who do you say that I am? You know, and he's like, the gates of hell, on this rock, he's going to build his church. You know, he's talking about the declarative statement that the Messiah, that Yeshua is the Messiah and the Son of Elohim. And he literally gives him power to bind on this earth what is bound in heaven, and what's loose on this earth, what's loosed in heaven. And like, this is the keys to the kingdom are given at that spot for a reason, because this is the very heart of darkness. This is where those immortals descended, and this is where the Messiah ascended onto the top of that mountain and was transfigured. On that very same spot that you're talking about, that creepy United Nations based, of course, the heart of the globalist agenda being seated there, because this is where the pantheon of the gods had their groundings. Well, they met in that dark chamber, and I mean, it is wild to consider how much was going on when the Messiah was here on the earth and going through his ministry and then revealing himself as the Son of righteousness on the earth. He's like, you guys started this issue in the garden with a bunch of false fiery ones showing themselves to mankind and bedazzling mankind and leading them astray. Well, he's going to show them who the true, authentic, deliverer of the nations is from that very same mountain. And so this is a huge part of the story and the narrative that, like you, I grew up my life not hearing that part explained at all. You know, you're just, these things, you don't understand Pan's Labyrinth. You don't understand the grottos. And none of these things are given any depth of context and explanation, you know, but even there's another book here that.
Have you read Dr. Heiser's Reversing Herman?
I've not read it, no, but I've listened to a few of his interviews on Reversing Herman, which were fantastic.
Oh, amazing. Okay, what's your next book you want to show
This
me?
This is another one. This is a history book that, man, should have been like required reading automatically. It's fantastic, and this is The Discovery and Conquest of Mexico by Bernal Diaz del Castillo. This is one of the conquistadors, right? But he was one of the priests of the conquistadors that were going in under Cortez on their invasion of Mesoamerica. And there is descriptions in here about how these different people were worshiping their mighty ones, right? How they were worshiping their gods as they began to invade the country. And Mexico was under an incredible amount of, like what we would think of today with these dragon cults. But they were worshiping these mighty ones, and they go into these territories when they first land, and they find these cannibalistic cults, you know, everywhere, you know, and the specific one that they deal with is this dragon they called Huachiblos, and they are the ones that are all about the human sacrifice specifically. And it's incredible to see, though, how always these are these principality wars. Whenever there's a massive takeover of a territory, it's the invocation of the priests battling with the priests of another kingdom.
Yes,
and this
Deuteronomy
literally
32. Yes.
Yes, it's always, every time I go and really examine history through a supernatural lens and understanding there's these spiritual powers behind the scenes and why there's these pantheons of gods that are fighting. They really are, though. And because of that, they have their priests on this earth who are working with the king class and the monarchies, whatever it may be, to enact their agenda of taking over a new territory. In order for that to happen, they have to usurp the immortal behind the scenes. But they have to eradicate the power bank behind the scenes. And that's what Cortez, when he goes into these territories, he understands, okay, there's a slave class, basically, of people who are the human cattle to this mighty one and his entire worship, the demand of human sacrifice and bloodshed on these in the pyramids, right? Don't forget there's an entire network of pyramids that's beyond your wildest imagination in the Americas, way more so than what you think of in the Middle East or Africa. There's an unbelievable amount of pyramids in here.
Oh,
And at
yes,
the heart
in,
of this,
in Hawaii
go ahead.
also. In Hawaii also, I just wanted to throw that in. There's like
Yeah.
here at Isaac's house, there's literally a pyramid in their backyard, like a massive thing you can hike up. So when you come to visit, I'd say when you come to visit us, Nathan, Isaac, or I don't know if Isaac will take you hiking up there. I can take you hiking up there. Isaac's not much of a hiker just because of his injuries and stuff. He's not too crazy. He's looking at me like, yeah, right, Mom. But I can take you. I would love to go up there. Kaylee might be up to it too. She's a hiker.
Hiking.
She misses hiking. Okay. But anyway, I'm sorry. Pyramids in America.
That's
yes.
great. And pyramids all over the world, true. But these don't fit the narrative as much here. But as they were going into these territories, what they describe in here, and I just encourage people, this is an easier one to read. This reads like a thriller novel. It's unbelievable, and it's readily available. But he goes through, and they would come into these communities, and they would find these priests that would just be covered in blood, and wearing skin suits basically, and they had a meat market for people. And this was the normative experience. But there was also the slave class that was living under this oppression that wanted out of it. And so Cortez, he plays this game of trying to win Montezuma and his people at the same time while he's trying to weaponize and have psychological warfare with the natives who want to overthrow Montezuma. And so it's just this crazy back and forth battle, but it fundamentally came down to he wanted to stop human sacrifice and have these priests abandon their gods and place in its stead the Virgin Mary, right? And and they all are about establishing the idol of Mary, the Queen of Heaven, right? As I absolutely am convinced, she's Ishtar, the Queen of Heaven.
Yep. All
All these other names, Diana and Semiramis. This is the Queen of Heaven. She's taking a territory over, and she is trying to use these physical agents in order to do that. But this book goes through a description of physical warfare on one side of it, but also the kind of spiritual warfare that they're encountering as these people would, during battles, go in and sacrifice all of these people to empower the gods and the spirits to unleash upon their soldiers, like what we read about in the book of 2 Kings chapter 2, when the Israelites are fighting the king of Moab, and he takes his son and offers him as a burnt sacrifice, and great wrath breaks out against Israel. And it's this spiritual unleashing of power for their soldiers to fight back against it. But that book chronicles that takeover and how they physically do it on the earth, and at the same time you see the spiritual forces behind the scenes engaging in this warfare. And it's a great description of that. And they even also mentioned the bones of giants that are brought to them to show them. And Cortez is like, oh, these are the giants and their ancestors. And there were these prophecies about these white bearded men who are going to come over, and the gods had told them, when they come over here, submit to them. To them. And that's literally these prophecies that were handed down generationally from different priests and their mighty ones who told them to submit to them. And that's part of why they capitulated in the end as well.
Yeah, that leads me to a book. I don't know if you've heard of this one, Nathan. This was recommended to me by Zen, and this actually is a precursor to that book that you just described, because I'm excited. I want to read that book about Mexico and all of the links to the serpent in there. But this one, Zen recommended because it includes the islands of Hawaii and of Polynesia. And why, I always wondered, why when you go to, like we recently went to Tahiti, we went to Moorea, why their worship of their gods is so similar when there's so many miles in between Hawaii, Tahiti, New Zealand, that basically all of Polynesia in the Pacific, there's so many links of very similar languages, very similar gods, very similar serpent worship, and it even extended over into Mexico. Adrian in the chat wanted to remind me, have you heard of the links between the first city built by Cain and that he named for his son Enoch? Have you studied the biblical geography of that one? And how it links
I've not studied the biblical geography of that.
Okay, so let me explain it to you real quick. This is super interesting. Zen has an entire teaching on this. I actually do too. of, it says in Genesis we get that Cain built the first city. He built 65 cities, we get in the book of Genesis, right? So the first city he built and named after his son Enoch, which I call Enoch the evil, because, like you said, there's 2 Enochs, there's 2 Lamechs, there's 2 of a lot of the different names that we get in the book of Genesis, in the Table of Nations and in Adam's bloodline, the bloodline of the serpent, whatever you want to call it. But because he named it, that's a clue that we have for an ancient city. It's actually, they're unearthing it as we speak in Mexico, because it says Cain went east of the Garden of Eden to the land of what you call Nod. I now know he went east to the land of what we call Mu, because I think they might have had a little bit of scribal editing there in the book of Genesis, but this is one of the names for it anyway. But it encompassed the entire, what we know as Polynesia now. That used to be a continent called Mu, and there's very good historical evidence that the author of this, who I don't trust 100% because he admits to being a Mason as well, but he's a historian, and he went to India and found on tablets quite a bit of evidence, and also in Mexico. He backs up his claims pretty well in this book, in Mexico. But this city, you have to look for the word Enoch in it to be able to discover what city this is. It's known as the oldest city and the largest on earth as of now, but it's beneath Mexico City. It's known as Tenochtitlan. And if you take away the T, there's that word Enoch. T-E-N-O-C-H. So it's basically the city of Enoch, which I think is like a huge, and we're not talking about Enoch from the book of First Enoch, not Enoch the good. We're talking about Cain's son, Enoch the evil, that he named the first city he built. And there's a ton of evidence showing that this was the first city that was built, because, we know Cain was the builder of cities, builder of walls, putting taxes on people. The most likely the daughters of Cain would have been the ones that were reproducing with the fallen angels from Mount Hermon. But this book, I read through this whole thing, and I was thinking, wow, because they talk about God, and Masons do this as well. They always refer to God, as we talked about earlier. It could be Godriel or G, as they always have the letter G on everything. In my opinion, that could stand for Godriel. Okay, Isaac's showing it a little bit closer. I found this on eBay. I also got a hardcover that's leather bound, because as you can see, my book is totally falling apart, as a lot of my books do. But in the end, when I got to the last 2 chapters, I kept thinking, what God do they serve? Because they say, oh, there's just one God, it's a deity, he's the creator of the world. And I'm like, they can't be talking about the same God as the Most High, who we worship. In the last 2 chapters, they said that all these cultures, including the ones in Mexico, the Mayas, they all have very similar cannibalistic, tendencies. That's part of their religion, and their god is the 7-headed serpent. Like, I was thinking, oh, of course it is. And they believe that that is the creator of the world, which is what they imparted on all these other cultures. And there's remnants of the Canaanites that were inhabiting the land of Mu, and they were so wicked that the Most High caused these gas chambers that were located beneath this continent. Let me see if I can find this map in here. I love maps. So these gas chambers that were beneath the continent of Mu to implode, and that would have caused, here you can see that, maybe Isaac, I got this here. So you can see like where the continent of Mu would have been located, Nathan, is this massive thing in the middle of the Pacific. And we recently we went on a cruise. I think we were on the cruise, was it I think it was right after we spoke with you the last time. I think Isaac might have done a show with you while we were gone. But we were doing this cruise we sailed from Honolulu south to Tahiti. And so we basically sailed over where this continent would have been located. And I noticed when we crossed the equator, the ocean got extremely smooth. It was just like glass. Whereas between Honolulu and a little north of the equator, it was there was a lot of waves. It was kind of bumpy. And then after we passed the equator, after we passed Tahiti and Moorea, and we headed to New Zealand, it got, of course, quite a bit colder, and there was a huge storm that came up. But I just remember seeing that when we crossed the equator, and then we also crossed the international date line. So that was a little strange. We went from I think it was October 27th, and we woke up the next day and it was the 29th. How's that go? How you like that? But just to see the sun, I mean, we couldn't see gates of the sun, but to be able to see the sun go down, and knowing that after reading the book of First Enoch, you know that the sun is going into a portal and coming back out another portal in the east to continue its journey around the earth, according to the book of First Enoch. But that was very interesting. I would highly recommend this book. Of course, as with anything, any of the extra biblicals, especially one that's clearly a Gnostic writing, always have discretion and pray before reading, and make sure the Holy Spirit is with you while you're reading this so you can discern the truth from the lies. But it does give really great information, because and it makes sense to how the author ties all of the islands in Polynesia together, and also to Latin America, to Mexico, to even parts of South America, to Easter Island. Who knew where those huge heads on Easter Island came from, right? So just a lot of information here that I've done a teaching on this whole book before. Those who are in our chat probably remember. But I would recommend getting this book, Nathan. I think this is like maybe $10 on eBay. So, The Lost Continent of Mu. All right, what else are you reading, Nathan? I'm so excited. I love talking.
Well, that's really
extra
interesting
biblicals
that
with
you bring up, I think, Tenochtitlan. How did you say it? You said the capital city, Mexico?
Tenochtitlan.
Oh yeah,
Tenochtitlan.
Tenochtitlan. Yes.
So that's the center point of basically that book, of Cortez's book.
Really?
In a huge way. And
Wow, I gotta read
the whole thing centers around that, and there's descriptions of that city. They describe not just that city, but they get to other cities along the way, because they have this kind of invasion, and they describe the cities as just as advanced, if not more so, more beautiful, ornate, and built out than any of the cities of Europe. And I understand these are like, and they have descriptions of them, sizes of them, the way that they built, though, when they get to Montezuma City, right, when they get to Mexico City, that entire city sits in a valley, right? There are very big mountains all around it, and it was a lake. It's a massive lake system.
Right.
And the way that they farmed it, though, and to go back for a second to it talking about Enoch, the son of Cain, when Cain is commanded as part of his curse to go wander the earth, and in an act of rebellion, he does the exact opposite, right? He literally plants himself and stays in one place, and then raises up this city so that he can, avoid some of the consequences of the curse on that sense. So I've always been fascinated to consider whether or not that's exactly the place that he went to, because the earth was not the same. The earth operated very differently before the flood and after the flood. And so the way that we would think about land masses and continents is very different before the flood. And so oceans weren't, like you said, oceans were not the norm. Okay, there you have big rivers, 4 major rivers that were dividing the earth into sections. But then after the flood, everything was different. And I really think the reason the flood waters stayed where they are and why we have oceans are today is because what was contained in those land masses was an extremely big problem, was a huge deal of where the population of man, under the influence of the Watchers and all of the giants and all of the other, there's a lot of different hybridized species that were going on there, but the technologies and the capacities of what they were doing in those places was a huge deal. And this is why there's such a heavy expenditure of resources in 2 main predominant areas: the stuff beneath the earth, the stuff beneath our oceans, and the stuff that's in the skies. These are the places, these realms that all of these beings have had interactions over time. But when Cortez finally does get to that city, the way that they cultivated that land was they built rafts, living rafts, all through the city, so that every one of them was accessed by individual drawbridges, so that everybody could compartmentalize themselves off. And they farmed it by drawing up soil, and from under the water, where there was all these reed mats, living islands that they had, and they would literally farm on the individual floating island, and they would use the soil from the bottom of the ground, or in the bottom of the waters. It's not a deep lake. It was not a deep lake, but it was some of the most fertile soils, but it was under the ground, and it then had to be brought up and then held together in living root webs on there. And so there's still some areas in Mexico City where they brought that back, and they have some living gardens that are doing this again, and you can see it's like a version of aquaponics, that a lot of people that are trying to study different methodology, that was the old way of doing it. And the entire city was built like this, because in order to feed all of the people that were contained therein, they also had to try to protect themselves from invasion. So the way that city was specifically designed is unbelievable in the descriptions as you're reading it, because we've been conditioned through this diabolically evil Luciferian idea of evolution. We think people are rock stick people, cave arts, drawing cave animals on the caves with their bare hands. we don't have a clue at the complexities of what they were capable of. And so they've preserved some of the like the Temple of Quetzalcoatl and the plumed serpent there in Mexico City, but a lot of them they bulldozed, they drained it, and so it's why it's one of the most polluted cities in the world, because it sits in this basin. But that's a really fascinating discussion kind of thread to pull on.
Oh yeah.
That just thrills me endlessly.
No, that's super interesting. I wasn't aware. I've seen they have like a 2 or 3 minute 3D CGI rendering of, it looks like a drone flying through what the ancient city of Tenochtitlan would have looked like, you know, around the time of its building. But to have all that extra information you just shared, Nathan, that is amazing. That's how they farmed, and that makes total sense. So that's awesome to think that they had to put together these living islands. I mean, that city must have just been awesome.
It was something to behold. And also at that, he describes in this battle that takes place there, they had the main temple for the god of war, like he's described, which kind of goes back towards Gadriel and these other ones, and he talked about the ones that were teaching mankind artifices of war and weapons of war and mail and armor. But they had these giant drums that they said the sound when these things would go off was so horrific, was so demonic, that there was this unleashing when they would do this. Also, even today, what they find are these things called Aztec whistles, death whistles that the Aztecs had, and they're kind of shaped like a skull. And when they blow it, it sounds like a woman, the most ghostly, ghastly, horrific woman screaming sound, utterly demonic sounding, horrible sounds when they blow these things. And these are invocation devices. It's not just, when you understand how so much of warfare is really fought and the dread of us, the dread of the enemy coming upon us, like the enemy's engaging in this fear game of who can get their enemy to be more afraid. Otherwise, in Deuteronomy 20 is this like chapter of descriptions in the Torah where he's like, hey, listen, if any of your hearts are filled with fear, don't go out to fight. You're banned from going out to fight if you have fear, because it's infectious. It's infectious and you're not supposed to have that. But even recently, I had someone email me who has a family member that basically interacts at this house where a very high profile murder took place, and in a very graphic, horrific way. Anyways, but they were describing to me individuals who would come and stay there to do witchcraft specifically, and they would find all of their spells and their incantations, and they had people that were coming to use the Aztec death whistle as part of their ritual ceremonies and for ghost tours and all the rest of it, trying to summon and call up spirits with these things. And this is stuff that they took because they excavated and found archaeological discoveries and are recreating it, and this is making its rounds through the communities. Go into these haunted places and use the Aztec death whistle as a way to call this stuff out. But these are weapons of warfare, and this is the kind of stuff that like Joshua is being told early on, like, listen, destroy everything.
Yes.
Eradicate everything. Don't even covet the silver or the gold that's on these idols. And so many of us have this idea of an idol, of this statue of Buddha looking thing that's dead and inanimate, not understanding that some of these things were like teraphim, that are the shrunken heads of the firstborn son that are imbued with the power from the stars when people light up candles to them,
like
and they speak to them.
Yes.
Like in the book of Jasher, and I did a video that was called Shrunken Heads and Talking Idols, just reading that account from Jasher, and you understand why Rachel, when she's leaving to go back to Isaac's father, and they're like, or to go back with Jacob to Isaac, that why she steals the household idols, the teraphim. She's like, I don't want my dad to know where we're going and what we're going to do. She's like, I got to take his idols from his house. But these things were powerful. These things had the ability to talk to people. And that's stuff that's just, what? Most people are like, what are you even saying? Like, we're not talking about the inanimate object. But some of this stuff is seriously powerful stuff, and why you're supposed to get rid of it. Have nothing to do with it, and don't desire it at all.
Yeah, and speaking of that topic also with the occult, I read through your entire book, Nathan. Thank you so much for sending us a copy of it, and it really hit home on a lot of the topics that you discussed, all of the things that you had to endure as a child. I highly recommend Nathan's book, Snatched from the Flames. If maybe Nathan, you could give information on how people can order that from you. I highly recommend that.
Yeah, they can, if you guys want, you can go to snatchedfromtheflames.com. You can access from there. You can download an audiobook version of that. I have an ebook version. Those are available for name your price, whatever you guys would like. And I have physical signed copies if you guys want to order a signed copy, or you can order just a regular print copy as well. Right there, I have the entire ebook and audiobook available for free for those of you guys that want to. And in all the descriptions of my YouTube videos, I have all of those free downloads available for you guys. I don't want anybody to keep from it. And more importantly, in my opinion, is I have an entire recording of the audio of the scriptures translation that's available for you guys. Man, water yourselves in the word continually. That's the weapons of our warfare. You know, I've also been working on an audio recording of the book of Jasher because it's so fantastic.
Oh, it is.
Dude,
It's so intense.
Thrilling.
The battles of the sons of Jacob. That was I love reading those because I haven't found those in any other account except maybe the Legends of the Jews. But that is just the book of Joshua. I give you a lot of credit for making all those audio recordings, and thank you so much for that, Nathan. Just because that's so valuable for people that. I mean, I listen to audio recordings at night before I go to sleep, or if I'm doing something and I can't read, I have audio recordings there. It's such a valuable thing to have, and the experience that you share in your book, you're so brave to do that, Nathan. It just must have been so much, like when, I don't know if you've read parts of my book, but it was kind of a similar thing with this post-traumatic stress that comes up when you're sharing these horrific experiences from your life. To me, when I was writing about what I experienced 20, 30 years ago and putting it on paper and getting my notes all together that I'd taken during that time, it's kind of gut-wrenching, and it made me feel like, is this really me? Am I writing about myself? Like all this stuff really happened to me? And then I'd look back on my notes and be like, so I was kind of thinking, maybe, did you go through a similar experience when you were putting all of this down on paper?
Yeah, that's well said, you know, too. And even I also read the entirety of your story about raising Isaac, too. You can see the crossover between how that stuff comes out when you try to raise your children, you know, and you can I could see the bleed over in a sense as I was reading through that, of how those experiences shaped you, and they prepared you also with, I think, bowels of mercy, which is what I see most evident in that story, in that testimony, both of your lives, you know, and you're getting to see the experience, the fruit of that on the other side of the camera. You can't see right there with Isaac. But it was excruciating to write that book. I
can't even imagine.
I picked it up just the other day to mention I have a chapter in there that's called A Letter from My Daughter.
Yeah, I remember
And
that.
after Naomi was born, sitting down, I was facing a moment of, like, I had an armed guard outside of my birthing suite when Naomi was born, you know, because I had family members that flew in. These people are like, the serpent cult that was in Mesoamerica was driven north during their expulsion. That territorial serpent, they went north, and their priest class went north into the Americas, into North America, and they invaded the land where we had so many of these tribes, millions and millions, and tens of millions of people that were living here. Highly advanced cultures as well, interconnected trade systems and commerce that was taking place there. Well, there was this unleashing of this other doctrine coming in, these other priests coming in, and they took over like they do wherever they go. They're parasitic, you know, in nature. And so that invasion of what took place there, we saw a lot of the consequences of the curse then break out against the people here in Northern America, and they began to get slaughtered and to be killed off, and then until another spiritual power came over and invaded from the east against them as well. But my family's tapping into that priest class and that spirit class. They're in the continuity of human sacrifice as a key tenet of it, and being raised up inside of this sons of the serpent, you know. It shaped a perspective of reality for me that I didn't realize was so abnormal for so long, because I was raised inside of it, that I thought it was normal information, not something so taboo. But my grandfather flew there to Colorado to try to receive Naomi, because that's what they do generationally. I mean, he was still there, even though we were adamantly against them, even though we had cut off all communications. I mean, they were still there to try to get her, you know. And it was just this realization where I sat down to write that letter to Naomi, because you got to understand something. I thought we were likely going to die. You know?
No, I can imagine.
There's no. I can sit here now. It's like 7 years later, and it's you know, I'm very insulated from that feeling. But even just picking that book up to read that chapter about trying to encapsulate a letter to my daughter, because I thought my death was inevitable and immediate. You know, that I thought it was very likely that she would be raised without me. I had always had this perspective that I was going to die, and die soon, you know. And so it took a deep unshaking of what had been a very conditioned fear for so long, that reprisals for speaking the truth, reprisals for telling my testimony. And it was a deliberate war against fear to write. It was a war. And any one of you who is trying to break free from generational strongholds, and every one of us have them. Every one of us has been raised in a culture where we've inherited lies systemically. In every area of our life, we have been raised up by liars. It's not to say personally there was an agenda against you by your parents. I come from a very extreme version of it, but every one of us has been raised up in the enemy's camp in so many ways. And it's very unsettling to realize that. And it's very costly relationally to undo the programming that has gone into the very fabric of your life, that's influenced your culture, your religion, your identity, your family. And so when you try to break out of that, man, there is a parasitical attack. Like when parasites die off in your body, they release all the eggs, they release all the toxins, they go nuts.
Yes, it's
and you experience the
painful.
same thing when you go through a massive wake-up call, and you start to try to contend against that. And so writing that book, and it was a warfare for me on a scale that I can't even describe. And going through and finally being done with it after, almost about a year, I didn't want to touch it again for a long time. I didn't want to read it. I didn't even want to look at it. And reading the audio of it was way harder. And I did it while I was working at a farm, and I recorded between like 3 and 6 in the morning while people were sleeping, and it was brutal. It was far harder to read that book. And so that's why the audio version, I encourage people, go down, listen to the audio version of it too, so you can hear what it's like to go through it a little more clearly than what you can when you read it. Because I think authors should always narrate their own books, and especially autobiographies, because people can understand you as the author in a different way, and you can experience what it's like for someone to become undone and to share the things that are extremely painful. But it's a way that we weaponize our testimonies, because at the end of the day, these are the tools that we have in our warfare. The enemy is defeated by the blood of the Lamb, the words of our testimony, and not loving our lives when faced with death. So that fear, that just dread when it comes on us, this is the power of the enemy trying to destroy us. But the power to defeat that is through the blood of the Lamb, and it is through the words of our testimony. And so those are why we make those declarative statements. That's why the Psalms is written the way it is. That's why it is such a powerhouse in spiritual warfare, because these are David's testimonies. These are his triumphs and his tragedies, all wrapped into the same story. And so why we must never lose sight of that warfare. And I encourage every one of you, please consider strongly writing out your story, writing out your testimony. You have no idea maybe what's behind the scenes until you start to do that.
Yes, and from what you read earlier in 1 Enoch 69, you mentioned one of the fallen angels was Penemue, and that was the so-called, the one that shared pen and ink with people. But the Most High created writing for his glory. These fallen angels just tried to usurp that and tried to change all this into the legal documents and whatever, to take down others and to for evil, but the Most High meant it for good. And so I encourage everyone listening to as well to take Nathan's advice. If you have we all have a story. There's various degrees of intensity as Nathan's story or my story or Isaac's story, but we all have something to share. And it's been encouraging for those who have read my book and one of my 2 books that I've put out there, one about my health and the other one about my son. Just the amount of encouragement that I've heard from people who have read those and just said, oh, that encouraged me so much, I was going through this. And I'm sure you've heard similar things from your book, Nathan, because it really did encourage me to hear your story as well. And that, yes, it's like, okay, we made it. We're on the other side. We're through all of this horrific things that happened in our 20, 30 years ago or less. And the Most High is faithful, and he will bring you through. If you're going through something right now, for any of those who are listening, he will bring you through this, and we are living testimonies to that, of his grace and his power. And he crushes the head of the serpent, even if we're raised in it as part of our bloodline, like Nathan. And he will crush the head of the serpent every time, and he wins in the end. And that's a main point that I got from reading Nathan's book. Is when I was finally near the end of it, there was a lot Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of trauma, and I can't even imagine trying to read my book out loud. Nathan, you'd encouraged me to try to do that, but it's hard to even just get through like one chapter without breaking down at this point, but the Most High will give me strength one day to do that. But I would strongly encourage you to, anyone listening, to get Nathan's book. If you haven't read mine, my testimony, or the testimony I wrote for my son, those are available at Sacred Word Publishing. Nathan just gave the information for his. And I also wanted to share with you, Nathan, when I don't think Isaac has read the entire book that I wrote about his testimony yet. I think some of it is still a little bit too traumatic for him to actually go through at this point. But the first person to actually read his book, besides myself, after I was done writing, was his wife. And this is before they got married. And Isaac was a little bit nervous about this because he was thinking, oh my goodness, she's not going to want to marry me after reading all of my dirt, you know. He's over there shaking his head. But you know, I just thought that was so special that she asked if she could read it, because she wanted to, without him having to go into all of the junk that from his past, to be able to have that hard copy where she could just read it and she could get to know him a little bit better, of what he's gone through, and the person he is today, of course, is nothing. He's a new creation. He's nothing like how he used to be, and I'm sure you saw that within the book, Nathan, how he kind of progressed, and that his key point of turning was the accident that he had, and he's had some more things along the way after he recovered from the accident, but just for all of us to witness that miracle, and for him to know in advance and to have told me a week before it actually happened, like you did the show with Isaac talking about the whole accident. I just thought it was so special that Kaylee, that his wife, would want to read that, and that she accepted it. She said, we all have things in our past, and she's actually working on a book right now about her past. So it's very encouraging to read other people's stories and to see the things that the Most High has brought you through, that He's brought all of us through.
It's amazing to hear. I'm so glad that you guys have labored towards that. You know, keep going.
Yeah.
You can do the audio recording. It's excruciating. You're gonna do great. It's brutal, but you can do it.
And that brings me to my next book that I've been reading to Noble, because Isaac and I were talking. Isaac and I are like, okay, we know we've experienced spiritual warfare firsthand with all the exorcisms I had to do on him when I was raising him.
And
Noble,
our own experiences.
And Noble has been like that strong guy, the head of the family, and however, he has not had as much in-depth experience with spiritual warfare as Isaac and I have. So besides your book, have you ever seen this book, Nathan?
Yes.
Have you
He
ever
came
read
to
this
set the
book?
captives free by Rebecca Brown.
Yes. So
You bet.
I first read this book before Isaac was born, probably in 1992. A friend recommended Dr. Brown's books for me to learn more about spiritual warfare, and so I'm about halfway through it with Noble. And his mind is being blown continuously because he had I don't want to say no idea. He knew about spiritual warfare from the Bible and from maybe a few other experiences, but not as intense as this, where you actually, this is, for those who haven't read this is about a doctor, MD, who worked at a hospital and discovered that quite a few of her staff were Satanists that were trying to kill her, and one of her patients was actually a bride of Satan, like top-level witch who had been trying to kill her, but then she went into the hospital. There's a lot of other circumstances, and this doctor eventually invited, because of the Most High's guidance and actually command, had her move into her house with her so that she could recover. And like what Nathan was describing earlier of having a security guard waiting outside the door of, when his daughter was born, that is a very real thing. Like they will do whatever it takes to try and murder the innocent, to try to murder those who are trying to get out of the cult. And this was a huge eye-opener for me. I am just really grateful that I read this back in 1992 before I met my son, so that I'd have a little bit of idea what was going on there with all his behaviors, and how, I have a master's in child psychology, and none of that applied when I was dealing with him. So I was just really grateful to have the spiritual aspect and the spiritual warfare tools that she describes in this book. So she's also written several other books. Prepare for War is another one. It's a small little picture of it on the back. I have the whole set, and I plan to read the whole thing to Noble, who's mind is continually blown, and I'll read him a chapter and he'll be like, okay, we need to just rest for a bit. We need to just take a little break of that so I can think about that. What we just read.
You should continue reading it for the class. Because
Yeah.
remember you did start.
That's true. I started reading a few chapters for during our Hebrew class when Noble wasn't able to teach. But I'm glad you've heard of it, Nathan. Have you read the
Yes.
book?
I have.
Parts you have.
I have read it too. I read it as well. You know, I don't think I read the last couple chapters. There's a certain section in there where I took a break and I did not finish it. And I think it's because I was confused there was a couple components of it that were going on during the course of it. And I think there was something also that Dr. Rebecca Brown, she wasn't trained up with an understanding about split personality multiples. And so some of those encounters of like demonic oppression or manifestation and stuff in spiritual warfare that take place in the course of that book that are described there, they seem like the enemy is able to not obey when there's, you know, commands of binding a spirit or anything like that. But I think a lot of it, what you're encountering, and you got to keep in the back of your mind, is this is a programmed multiple, somebody that's a chosen one for a coven or a cult, like you were describing, that has split personalities that are demonized as well. You know, there you go. She's got the graphic going into that. But a key component of that during deliverance or trying to command spirits to come out of them too, you can sometimes be dealing with a personality that's not going to obey you. You know what I'm saying? So they might physically beat people up. And believe me, Russ Disdar's book, Expelling Darkness.
Yes.
This is
I
a
have to get his
fantastic
book,
tool
too.
for those of you that are wanting to get a better understanding of spiritual warfare. And I highly recommend this one, Engaging Non-Human Entities Now and in the End of Days. This is a great battle, just a great strategic warfare one of realizing what's happening and how to engage that, and a lot more detailed explanations of how our authority works in the Messiah, and also how to navigate in dealing with somebody that's also a program chosen one. Like this chapter here on page 292 is called Rituals, Demons Summoned, and Demons Sent. This is, I'm just going to read here from that because it says in verse 17, 2 Kings, he said, "They caused their sons and daughters to pass through the fire, used divination and omens, and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of Yahuwah to anger him. Then I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. For they are spirits of demons performing signs, who go out to the kings of the earth and of the whole world to gather them to the battle of that great day of Elohim Almighty." Revelation 16. "Then Pharaoh also called the wise men and the sorcerers. Then the magicians of Egypt likewise performed with their secret arts." Exodus 7. "As I stood in the middle of that ritual site, I could feel the demons scurry around. It was as if they knew who we were, and they were angry that we came onto their claimed territory." Rustizar. "When I stood in the center of the ritual chamber in the Hall of the Dead at Himmler Castle, I stood on top of what many called the most powerful portals of the demons. Himmler stood there, the old sorcerers stood there. We stood there and prayed against all of it. And Elohim shielded us. The power of Elohim was surrounding us." 1 Peter 1. "The dark priestess from the voodoo-style ritual summoned and sent a demon against me in a death ritual. As I told earlier in this book, the death ritual seemed to have an effect on me like a flu-like sickness until I really discerned that the sickness was not a natural thing. Once I realized that what was affecting me, a demon that was summoned and sent in a death ritual, I got up and began to pray hard. And in moments, that sense of sickness left me totally. I did ask Yahuwah why this death ritual done against me. One of the coven members had stolen a picture of me and used it in the blood ritual that was done and had any effect at all. And the spirit of Elohim reminded me, and Yahuwah spoke to me that I needed to know how real the dark side powers were, and I needed to know what we can do and should do to defeat it. Then Yahuwah took me to these verses. Now these are the nations that Yahuwah left to test those in Israel who had not experienced war in Canaan, so that later generations of the children of Israel who did not know war before might know it, to teach them how to fight." Judges 3. And this is why I think we must never lose sight of understanding. We really do have adversaries that are here to wage this war against us. And sometimes these things are coming into your life to teach you how to fight. Like, this is what the Father is training up generations of men and women right now to do, is to know how to engage this stuff. Because there is an unleashing of immortals. Like, there's still a great rebellion of immortals that are going to choose to fight against mankind. They're the great deceptions. We haven't taken the best shot at the enemy by any stretch of the imagination. And we need people who are raised up and trained up to engage the enemy, to be confident, to tear down strongholds. Like, what did Paul do in Ephesus? He's going against the very mighty one, Artemis, and the most powerful worship center of her entire kingdom there at Ephesus. So when he's there, man, that's the war that he's really fighting. That's the territorial takedown, and why the type of warfare that took place was so monumental that all the people that were part of that kingdom suddenly came and brought all their ritual objects and books and had them burned. It's a big takeover, and this is stuff we can't lose sight of anytime we're dealing with warfare.
Right, right. Noble and I visited Izmir, Turkey, which is formerly known as Ephesus, and they took us some ruins. I think it was like the Temple of Diana, which we know is Ishtar. You know, all the different names for that particular deity, and it was like freezing cold. We were there in winter, not the greatest time to visit Turkey. Everybody, I was thinking Mediterranean, that it might be a little warm, but not in December. And we went walking around all through these ruins, and of course they have tour guides. But the part that I remember the most was what they called I think they call it the Sorcerer's Tunnel, where they had their so-called physicians. We know where that comes from. You know, the whole pharmakia background, where people who wanted to be healed. This is what the tour guide's telling us as we're walking through this tunnel. There was these little like holes on the side of this underground tunnel. It's all rock. I mean, it looked like it was clean. Maybe it had been used recently. Who knows? But it was kind of like bizarre to walk through this tunnel and have the tour guide telling us that if someone wanted healing, they would walk through this tunnel and they would do all these different rituals, and the priests would like blow things through these holes in the sides of the tunnel, and they would come out and they would be healed. So that kind of makes me think, like, what type of sorcery was going on? Because we know Ephesus was like full of witchcraft, full of Satanists, full of all of that when Paul visited there. We get a little bit of an account of that, but I just thought that was kind of interesting, that healing, that sorcerer's tunnel is a little precursor to what we have now with pharmakia, is what I was thinking.
Oh man, can I tell you just a version of it I saw at church?
Oh, please do.
Jeez, there's this big New Apostolic Reformation stuff that was going on. If you guys aren't familiar with that, it's a different kind of breakout of
the NAR.
NAR, yes, as it's commonly
taken
known.
over.
But man, another tactic of the enemy in a totally different arena, right? A different strategy of getting people to engage in witchcraft unknowingly, right?
Yes, the false
Anyways,
prophets.
but what?
Yes.
Yes. There's a lot of prophets that may be sent by Yahuwah to test the people whether or not they really want to be all about Yahuwah, or whether they want to just be about their own thing, signs and wonders, you know?
Yep.
And so it's something to test very heavily and very carefully. Anyways, there was a big part of that too that was doing tunnel work, fire tunnels. And they were having people line up through this and go through the tunnel of people, and as they were going through, they talk about what their problems were, talk about their ailments, and then everyone was breathing on them, right? Like fire, breathing on them and touching them to bring the fire down upon them, to bring the healing and the anointing, this fresh new anointing to come down upon them.
Oh.
But as I was like, I'm like, this sounds exactly like fire rituals, tunnel rituals, and the one you just described in there. This is maybe overt and on the ground or the surface, but other times they would bring in like big bouncy beanbags too, and beanbag chair kind of stuff to like bump into the people. And I was like, this is the same stuff the stinking New Age church in Boulder is doing to do rebirthing rituals.
Unity
you know?
Church.
And I'm like, what? This is all just like, and it was such a strange time to be going back between these places in Colorado. I know this is like an area you were too, but
Yes.
like they were doing the same exact type of stuff in like the Unitarian churches that were embracing a lot of New Age ideology there. And I was like, these people are getting it from a different source, but they're getting the same doctrine,
Yes.
infiltrating and influencing their ways of life in such a powerful way. And it just made me think of that
No,
as you're
and
describing that
masquerading-
tunnel too.
Right, that's so bizarre. I haven't heard that one. I've heard of the Bethel grave soaking thing that is they're part of the NAR as well, and that made Isaac and I totally stop listening to their music. But that's another note. But it's because you don't know, like, I mean, they're just infiltrating everything, and they're putting the stamp of Christianity on it so that it'll draw people in, and they're thinking, oh, this is a new way to combat all of these different psychological issues and spiritual issues in the church, and it's just to me, it's just outright Satanism. And like you said, that's creepy. With calling down fire from heaven, that's not a good thing. I remember there was like a praise and worship song we actually used to do, and I was in a praise and worship band called "Lord, Let Your Fire Fall." And why are we singing about asking Him to send His fire down on top of it? Like, that's not something you want to do, right? I mean, it's just they're making everything so backwards, and all of these so-called leaders from this NAR movement are just their backgrounds. I used to listen to a ton of Christian music, and we've been to, Isaac and I especially, have been to our share of mega churches nationwide, and it's just that they all have a very similar doctrine, and it's not to teach the truth. It's to kind of just like quote a Bible verse here and there, put it into a big sermon, tie it into the pastor's vacation somehow. I mean, it all kind of has like the same, throw in some jokes, draw people in, tickle their itching ears, play a whole bunch of really loud, like professional sounding praise and worship music, and it's just, you have to be so careful. Like I can't go into a megachurch anymore. I remember sharing with you my experience at our last megachurch with the Ramseys sitting right next to me.
Yeah.
There's been other experiences in these churches that are led by, I think it was, before it was called NAR, I think it was Word of Faith, and that was like the Copelands
Yes.
and the Osteens and all of that from like the 70s and 80s, and then they kind of turned into this more modern version of NAR, which is like Bethel, Hillsong. For those of you who don't know, just like the huge mega churches that are popping up. I don't know, did you see the one in Texas this past Christmas that had like, they had a bunch of videos going around in December of this church in Dallas. I can't think of the name of it, but it was this thousands and thousands of people. They paid over $50 for a ticket to see their Christmas show, and it was like, just, they had live camels, they had like lights. I mean, it was this mass production just to glorify Satan. And they featured Santa right next to baby Jesus. I mean, it's just so blasphemous. I could barely even watch like the footage that they had up of this. But it's just to me, it's just getting worse. And for those that are in the church, like you were talking about, when you're raised in the cult, it's kind of like normalized. I think that kind of happens for those of us who are raised in these specific type of churches and have our parents' kind of stamp of approval on them. That's what happened with me anyway. And to kind of think, okay, this is normal. This is what church is supposed to be like. But then you go back to like the early church in the Bible. They met in people's homes. They didn't have these massive buildings that had mortgages and constantly asking people for money so the pastor can get a new jet or so. It's so opposite of, we've come like so opposite from what the early church was like. And I know that there are smaller groups that are kind of coming up here and there to try to bring that back, what the early church was like. We have something kind of similar going on here with just very small groups of people. And when we travel, we do Bible studies, we do scripture studies, and introduce books like the Book of First Enoch. We did that in Wisconsin. That was fun. For all those out there from Wisconsin watching, yes, this is me. I really enjoy sharing all this information that I've learned, just to try to bring people out of that mindset that I was in, being raised in those types of churches. You've gone to several of those in Colorado too, right, Nathan?
Yes. I was going
know
to
what
say,
I'm
even as
talking
you're
about.
describing that kind of mega show, when my family moved to Colorado from the White Mountains of Arizona, that was my first experience at a mega church at New Life Church, maybe New Life Community Church, New Life Church in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And they have that massive auditorium. And then next to it is the International House of Prayer, one of the IHOP places,
Yeah.
which is also kind of interconnected into this web of the NAR now as well, and maybe always has been. But that was my first experience of going through the mega church mechanism, the industrialized business version of it. This is a book that even just touches on it. This is the Underground History of American Education by John Taylor Gatto. This is a phenomenal historical examination of why did we get to the version of education and schooling that we got today. And I've done a couple of recordings of the just chapters of these. They're monumental chapters, that being said, but I did one on why you can't read examining why the version of reading that's being taught to people is to make them illiterate, unable to read beyond like a third grade level.
Wow.
Memorizing words as opposed to memorizing phonics in order a way to learn and build letters. But anyways, on this chapter that's called True Believers in the Unspeakable Chautauqua on page 197, he just has a little digression on the infiltration of churches and the business, the merchandising of churches here. And it says, I'll just go back a little bit. Both movements to centralize the economy and to centralize schooling were aided immeasurably by the rapid disintegration of old-line Protestant churches and the rise of pious ashes of the social gospel ideology, aggressively underwritten by important industrialists who intertwined church-going tightly with the standards of business, entertainment, and government. The experience of religion came to mean, in the words of Reverend Earl Hoon, the best social programs money can buy, a clear statement of the belief that social justice and salvation were to be had through skillful consumption. Shaler Matthews, the dean of Chicago School of Divinity and editor of the Biblical World, president of the Federal Council of Churches, these are all screaming bad New World Order words, right? Wrote in his influential Scientific Management in the Churches back in 1912 to convince American Protestants that they should sacrifice independence and autonomy and adopt the structure and strategy of corporations. If this seems to make the church something of a business establishment, he wrote, it is precisely what should be the case. If Americans listened to the corporate message, Matthews told them they would feel a new spell of Jesus. In the decade before World War I, a consortium of private foundations drawing on industrial wealth began to slowly work towards a long-range goal of lifelong schooling and a thoroughly rationalized global economy and society. These were some of those change agents that began to infect the academic side, the seminary side, the writings and the adoption of it, right? The American Bible Society, some of these groups that were cherry plucking Bibles, literally ripping them to pieces, and then giving churches a franchise model, a corporation model of how we can use the church as a form of entertainment, as a form of government, and as a form of standard of business to influence mankind. Because there's two areas, and these, my contention is always back in the 1800s, this releasing of the immortals. They got their agendas and they all had their different arenas. Well, the one that's behind this battle here in churches, their agenda was to get people away from literacy of the scriptures fundamentally, and why they needed to create from the pulpits and the newspapers the control of the information. And so that's the areas that they targeted. They targeted the media, which back then was predominantly through newspapers, and they targeted the pulpits. And then, like Andrew Carnegie, one of these individuals that was financing it, gave every church in America, he financed them to have a new organ put in, a church organ. And this got him access to kind of the boards, and he began to bring in his own influencers. Very staunch atheist, paid to have the churches, bought his way into it. But this is that changing that began, just so long ago, 100 years ago,
Yes.
began to influence the models that churches began to adopt. And what we're seeing in the manifestation of that now is the fruit of that being borne out, to where I'm going to New Life Church as a 12-year-old, and I'm seeing for the first time the entertainment experience of a church. I had never seen that before in my life. I had never seen thousands of people in an auditorium with a rock concert, besides maybe Carmen, when I saw like down in Phoenix, Arizona, like
saw
Carmen was my
too.
first experience of it was paradigm shifting
Like
to
the
go to that.
ghost
And every year
singing.
they would put on the Passion. Yes. Yeah, you got it. Ain't no monsters in my bed tonight.
Carmen
I used
came
to
to
sing a lot of
Honolulu
Carmen.
as well. So
But
funny.
I saw they would do the Passion play. That was their big one every year, the big Passion play. And I remember sitting in there as they had, Satan coming out on his breakout, and he would walk the aisles. The devil horned, red and black, looking like Darth Maul from Star Wars, Nightmare, demon, Satan, come out with legions of demons descending from the ceiling
Oh my
on
gosh.
harnesses, right? And they would be twirling with black robes and chains, snarling. And I was like, this is my nightmares. Like, these are
Yeah.
literally the nightmares of my life. And they come crawling down, landing next to the children and stuff, and they're
Oh my
like
gosh.
screaming at you. I'm like, what the heck is this? You know, and it was just like, this was the production of it. And then at the end of it, you could go meet Satan. You could go meet the demons and have like the meet and greet. And you want to
Oh
talk
my
about a way to
gosh.
just totally influence the minds of the masses, is to show them the entertainment version like this, because that's what got burned into my mind. You know,
Oh
that's the
yeah.
stuff that gets seared into your conscience. And so even there's a whole other version of this that takes place outside of Branson, Missouri,
Oh
where
god.
that is like the Las Vegas of Christians.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
freak show level of it. And they've got all these same production scales that are going ongoing, so you can go get it any time of the year, you know. And this version of it that people are receiving is there's an agenda behind it, you guys, and that's why it's so empowering to know the word, so that when you see it, you can go, oh,
Yes.
this is the fruit of these spiritual kingdoms that we're dealing with. And you must understand, that's the stuff we're wrestling with. That's the powers behind this that are merchandising mankind. That's why
Yes.
franchise Christianity is so effective, because they have used industrial psychologists to sit down and train church staff on how to build out a successful model based off of the human traits, the psychology of the customers that are in a given region. You know, and this is why
Yes.
church plants are literally sat down and deciding what's the type of people that are here, what's the demographic, what's their per income capita. I mean, all this stuff is taken into consideration. It's not like you described, brothers and sisters gathering together in houses, breaking bread together.
Right.
Totally different version.
This
But
is
that
a
was very strategic, and it was built in by design.
The Purpose Driven Church by Rick Warren. That's like, to me, that's like the most blasphemous, extra biblical, if you even want to call it that pastors were pushing like maybe 25 years ago or so. And they were pushing, they were selling it at the church bookstores. They were like,
Yes.
the pastors holding it up saying, everybody should get a copy of this. I mean, that's kind of where everything was starting to go into that whole franchise of, where you wouldn't say anymore, you wouldn't say, oh, well, I go to so-and-so church. You say, oh, I go to Wayne Cordero's church, or I'm under so-and-so. You know, it's like all of a sudden that pastor's name becomes like this celebrity
Stanley.
that you are under, you know, and you no longer say like, oh, I'm a Christian. You say, oh, I'm under so-and-so. Like it's not, you're not under the Most High anymore. You're under this so-and-so pastor that is reading on, not this book, but reading the Purpose-Driven Church and all the other material that they've come out with after that one. I think that was kind of like the monumental one that really kind of tried to put the business model into different churches. And even next month, I put this up on my Facebook page. There's this group that's headed by like this kind of motley crew of Tim Tebow and the Robertson Duck Dynasty guys, and the bunch of different Bethel singers, and they're going around to different major cities in the U.S. to do exactly what you said, Nathan, to present this business-like franchise model to help churches grow financially. That is so far removed from what the early church was all about. It's such a blasphemy. So disgusting.
And it's not only that too. I really believe it's a strategy to disinherit people from their faith in the kingdom. You know, like it's an effective means at eradicating people's convictions, because like the emergent church model is designed to be about a 2-year plan. Like
Yeah,
it
emergent
really
church,
is
yes.
effective for a couple years at keeping somebody a part of it. But what happens is there's the lack of discipleship, authentic discipleship,
Yes.
as a core basis of what makes the body of Messiah so effective at making disciples who make disciples who make disciples. That's the key backbone of it. If people aren't replicating and growing and maturing in their doctrinal understanding of the scriptures, they're going to lose bad. That's the whole parable of the sower screaming narrative warning in the Messiah's words is like, listen, the enemy's going to send his ravens in here to pluck this word away. You know, he's going to choke them out with the worries of the world, the cares of this world, right? He's
Yes.
going to destroy these people, as much as you might call them new converts or anybody else, because yes, you can deceitfully get or manipulatively get lots of people to show up at something and get everyone excited about it and hype it up and be very effective and fervent to get people to be a part of it and jump onto it. That's what Flatiron's community church was. They were like you said, I go to Flatirons. That was the thing, man. They had the bumper sticker, the logo,
Yeah.
so you could spot each other, and it was the culture. It
Yeah.
became a culture, a brand. Just like people are, I'm an Apple person, or I'm an Android person, or they made it a successful brand image. And so as they take that and they apply it, though, it does not last long term. And they understand that model is the way it's built in. You know, you're not going to be getting repeat customers into perpetuity, but they are just trying to capitalize and maximize profit in that short run. But what I saw, even from my church, like the pastor who was there, the head of the college ministries back at Flatirons Community Church, and the interns and all of like the leadership, the tier 1 leadership, the best of the body in a lot of ways truly were eradicated within a couple of years. Left the field of ministry, completely abandoned their walk, like became backwards and waywards in so many different directions. So many of them took what they learned from that church and they all started businesses. They left ministry and they just began to do businesses. Almost all of them did real estate or investment and everything like that. But it was detrimental. Like the pastor who married my wife and I, like that's what he started a business campaign in realtor. And it was like, what a waste. You know, to me, people that are called into ministry to be deliberate in there should be a very distinct delineation between ministry and business and merchandising. Because I do believe that's the doctrines, the insidious nature of the doctrines of Balaam that get brought in is desiring the wages from righteousness. You know, like he was willing to sell out for the right amount of money. That's fundamentally, you're dealing with Balaam's kingdom. And I think that's unfortunately what we see so much of today is people that are willing to seek out and use the gospel as greediness for gain. You know, they're using the word as a cloak to fleece the sheep. And it's detrimental to watch it take place. But to see how many people that were all at the front of the pack have just left it, who became atrophied and abandoned it. And it was almost consistently within about a 2-year period versus the transformational progress of what happens if you read the scriptures and go through discipleship. It's like a 3-year transformational journey to really undo the works of Babylon that have been put into you and to become a new person. Even Saul, you know, Paul is like goes into Arabia for 3 years to be washed in the water of the word, to have his mind transformed and to have the scriptures come alive to him in a different way. And this is a guy who had a totally different foundation of understanding the word to begin with. And so that process of long-term discipleship and maturation and heavy emphasis on the word is not going to be easy to recruit people into. It's not going to be feisty and theatrical and entertaining to people. Right. It's going to be a course on discipleship, and people are in discipline. And that's super unpopular, and it tends to be, well, that's how you weed out a lot of the chaff, you know, from amongst the wheat.
Oh, for sure. And you probably read in my book, my dad was a pastor, my grandpa was a pastor, my great-grandpa was a pastor, all in the Lutheran church, of course. So, I mean, I got to see a lot of the corruption firsthand, and how, you know, like you said, that Carnegie guy, to be able to get on the board is like the powerhouse of the church. Like, they make all the decisions. The pastor really doesn't have a say. From what my experienced anyway, the board members were very key in controlling and basically governing the church and deciding down to, like in the Lutheran church, I don't know if you're aware of this, but at the beginning of the year, all the pastors in Lutheran churches around the U.S., I'm not sure if it's worldwide, but they all are sent a list of what they are to preach on every week for the entire year. So they're all preaching on the same thing. To me, it's just like, what is this? You know, where's the Holy Spirit in this? You know, but so my dad, of course, would get his list and preach on, you know, like a good Lutheran pastor every week. You know, he'd follow, and all the other Lutheran pastors around the country continue to do this. To me, it's kind of like the Reformation was just like a precursor to the ecumenical movement that Billy Graham brought into the country, that Dr. Darby was key in making sure that the seminaries all taught certain things, especially in doing down to doing Bible translations. I mean, the whole thing definitely was orchestrated, and the Lutheran Church is so close to Catholicism. I mean, they still practice the sacraments, they still have confirmation, they still do baby baptism. I mean, there's just so many abominations in that church, and it's just such a freeing feeling to know the truth. Because even back as far as, like, I always tell Isaac, back as far as, you know, like 6th grade, when I started confirmation classes, I had so many questions, and it was the assistant pastor teaching the classes, not my dad, thank God. And so I would like have scheduled meetings to meet with this assistant pastor and ask questions about baby baptism and why in the world are we having to memorize Luther's catechism instead of the Bible? Why is the second commandment removed from Luther's catechism just like it is in the Catholic catechism because it mentions idols? You know, there's so many questions, and they just got to the point where there's like, just hurry up and get confirmed already, you know, just. And I'm thinking, that's so backwards. Why are we not getting baptized now instead of as a baby? I mean, just all these questions, but that was part of my journey to the truth, being raised in a family like that. It was more of an indoctrination that had gone on for generations within my family. So even as of right now, I think I'm the only one still in my family that's not Lutheran, much to the despair of my father and my other relatives. But it's something similar to you, Nathan, where it's like your entire family has been totally programmed, and somehow the Holy Spirit has led me on this journey out of there, and I'm just so grateful for that. And I'm sure you can relate on a different level, of course, but it's just to go back and to want to redo some of the things that I did with my son as far as bringing him to mega churches, thinking that any church is great except the Lutheran church because they do this, this, and this. But then to come to the horrible realization that the NAR and all the other movements are taking over the larger churches and the so-called Christian churches nationwide as well. It's just, I can't even call it churches anymore. I mean, Isaac and I call it a circus because that's basically what it is. And being up in the front on the keyboard Sunday after Sunday for Sunday morning, Sunday night service, Wednesday night in Pentecostal churches and other mega churches, I got to see a lot, I'll just say that. But it's just, it's such a, it's kind of like a freeing feeling to me anyway, just to be able to look back on everything, but yet to pray for those who are still involved in all of these different cults. I don't even know what else to call it, these circus cults that meet Sunday mornings, and people just go there just to have their ears tickled and to hear a good message, and then they're good the rest of the week. You know, it's like, that's not how the early church was set up at all. And that's like a huge part of Nobles of my ministry also, to try to gently teach people who are still involved in the different denominations the truth, and especially the history. A lot of people don't even bother to look into the history of their said denomination. And to me, that's just really sad. I just pray that those, if there's anyone watching this show who's still involved in the denominations, I really encourage you, just go back and look through the history. Look at how your church, your specific church was formed. Noble always said, ask for their doctrinal statement. Whenever we go to try a new church out, look at their doctrinal statement. Look at what they actually believe. See if that lines up with what you believe. See if that lines up with what the Bible says. See if that lines up with what the Holy Spirit's telling you. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to discern, and especially through prayer.
And if they won't even show it to you, that's a red flag.
That's true. That is true, Isaac. But Nathan, it's been so good to have you on our show. We're coming to the end. We've got to go, and we're teaching a marriage class right after this, in person at our friend's farm. And so Isaac and Kaylee are a big part of that, and Noble and I are teaching that. So it's been so awesome. We have to have you come back on our show, Nathan. It's so cool to talk to you. And I still have a stack of books I wanted to share with you, but we'll have to save that for next time. And I'm sure you have more. I see more in the background and behind you too. So I hope you enjoyed this, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Hebrew class. And make sure you go look at those websites Isaac put up in the chat, Nathan, how they can find you, find your channel, find your book. I think a lot of people in the chat already follow you, but for those of you who don't know who Nathan Reynolds is, he has the Linen Railroad YouTube channel. He's a dear brother and friend. We've gotten to know him over the past year, and we look forward to having you back, Nathan.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an absolute joy.
Okay, well, on that note, a big shaloha to everyone. Thank you guys for joining us, and we will see you next week, Saturday, same time. As a family ministry, Hebrew Hawaiian unravels the many hidden things that are shown in plain sight by this world. The two distinct bloodlines that occupy Earth have much to do with the condition the world is in today. Cain's bloodline builds cities, sets up controlling governments, extracts taxes from the people to live on the land, and is only interested in wealth, power, and fame like their ancestors, as well as building underground. The bloodline of Adam is reflected in the remnant, those who follow the commandments of the Most High, those who help others in need, who care for the helpless, the orphans, the widows, the homeless. They grow food and provide housing, physically and spiritually feeding anyone who is brought into their life. Hebrew Hawaiian also goes in deep and studies to show ourselves approved. As our family ministry, we reach extended family members worldwide, not just online, but through our cruise ministry, through our in-person Bible fellowship. And it is our mission as a family to encourage those coming out of the beast system set up by the Canaanites and the offspring of the serpent. We are an online ecclesia offering prayer for anyone who requests it. We are joined in ministry with the Garcia family and sacredwordpublishing.com. Study with us weekly on Saturdays at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on this channel. Shaloha.